What we are going to like to see is more discussion around whether, and I did a workshop on this a month or so ago, whether AI agents are going to be the customers for the APIs.
I see.
Which is, you actually ask, let's say you're a financial services company or a retail company, you might ask your agentic AI system rate this transaction in terms of fraud risk. And it might do a whole bunch of stuff. And one of those things it could do is ask the phone network, or has this person done a SIM swap? Do we trust their identity? Is the phone in the same place as the credit card? And so at that point, the agent, which might also have gone to your credit history on Experian and a bunch of other scoring things, it might well then rock up to either an individual telco or an aggregator and go, what are your fraud indicators for this transaction? Should we trust this person? And then, at that point, if you like, the customer is the AI agent, which has gone and asked for it.
Right.
And so I think, there's various levels and layers of that type of thing, but it's that type of thing where it's the agent that's invoking it, because the agent's been given an intent, and the intent could be check this for fraud risk. It could be make my video work better.
Yeah.
Or it could
and
be
then we
make
leave it to the agent to work out how best to do that.
Where do these agents come from?
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. We haven't done one for a little while because of half term, and we're doing this one a little bit early so that we can publish it tomorrow, today being Thursday, tomorrow being the Friday before Mobile World Congress, so you can listen to it on the plane and basically learn so much about World Congress that you almost might as well not bother going. But turn up anyway.
Just turn up in Barcelona.
Just turn up just to get pissed. That's the only reason I go.
That's a coincidence.
That's a coincidence. And as has become tradition for us, our special MWC preview one, we've got analyst Dean Bubley on. And one of the reasons, apart from the fact that Dean is one of the most knowledgeable telecoms analysts out there, is that he takes a gratifyingly sort of taciturn and standoffish approach to the whole event. I think you go to Barcelona, but you don't ever go in the Fira, is that right?
Yeah. No, I'm off-site only. I'm not registered for the event. I run my own MWC Fringe, which basically is me meeting up with clients, friends, and a few random...
I like that concept, MWC Fringe.
Yeah.
Up-and-coming comedians.
Absolutely, yeah. I might be listening into a couple of the stream sessions as well, but I'll try and do it from a tapas bar with a glass of wine and some food.
Can you listen to the stream stuff for free, or do you have to have a sort of like online pass or something?
I did last year. I don't know if I've changed it.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, they have. I mean, we as journalists, we don't really get exposed to the commercial side of it, but it's pretty rapacious for people who don't get a free pass like us, just being able to get in, and obviously the stands and all that sort of thing.
Well, I don't know what they're paying for stands these days, but they were never cheap.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, I think GSMA does all right out of it.
You could argue it's a conference company with a bit of a standards and advocacy agency tacked on the side.
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah.
So yes, in fact, we should say a former colleague of ours, I won't name him just in case because he was just emailing behind the scenes, but they're opening up a Middle East version, and one of our former colleagues is involved. So a bit of free publicity for you there, GSMA. I might take the piss out of your profiteering.
I thought they had a Dubai event.
Oh, maybe they're expanding it or rebranding it. I don't know. I didn't really look into it that much, if I'm honest. But yeah, I mean, they've always had the East Asia one, haven't they? Or for ages. Yeah. And they've got an Americas one.
I don't think it's happening this year.
The Americas one.
The Vegas one? No.
Yeah, the Americas one essentially was they blended it with the CTIA event. And I think...
And then it was equally bad.
I've never been to it, so... But
turns out rebranding doesn't solve everything.
I remember going to the old CTIA one, and I never thought that much of it.
Right. In terms of what? Size, relevance?
Size, it's... there's a couple of speakers there, maybe from the big telcos, but you go to Barcelona and there's the whole world community of telcos there, so it always felt a little bit parochial.
I hear you.
The Vegas one had a decent attendance.
But there's so many other events in the US or Canada increasingly as well. So yeah, there's like things like the Wireless Infrastructure Association, the power companies run one called. Their one's called ConnectX, unlike NetworkX, which is another one. And there's a bunch of others. So, I'm going to one.
Soon Elon Musk will sue all of us that have got X and...
Yeah, I know. I'm going to one in a couple of weeks' time called IWCE, which is a sort of critical comms and public safety communications one.
There's GTC coming up soon as well, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. It's the same week. I did see if I could get an analyst pass for it, but they wanted me to pay, so I'm going to... Sorry, NVIDIA, but I'm interested in you, but not enough to actually...
Jesus Christ, NVIDIA, like you're really short of cash at the moment. Fuck's
They're
sake.
quite happy to spend their money on things normally, and
they're only projecting 78 billion for this quarter.
Do you know what I mean? And then they still want analysts to pay to go and give them free publicity at their goddamn event. It winds me up. What's I going to say?
Yes, say it, Scott.
Yeah. What do you really think, Scott? What was I going to say? I'm not sure if you're the most itinerant analyst. You're competing with Paolo Pescatore on that one, I think. And you go to often quite different events because he's more consumer aligned. But you two just seem to constantly be on planes.
Yeah, I had a bit of a gap for a while, but then January I was in Tokyo with WBA, Wireless Broadband Alliance, talking about Wi-Fi and stuff like that. And next few months I've got about 4 or 5 trips to US and Canada, maybe one to Brazil, which there's a Brazilian event for ISPs, and I got an invite to this, and I thought, sounds interesting. 40,000 attendees at a Brazilian ISP event. So
sounds like a carnival.
That could be that could be interesting.
Yeah, it could be. So cool. I'm going to keep the opening bollocks to a minimum. I mean, I don't think we've been up to loads in the sort of week and a half since we did stuff, but because it's the MWC preview event and we got a hard stop, I'm just going to not go there and just get stuck straight in.
Okay.
If that's all right with everyone.
Yeah. Sure.
So what we want to do, as we always do, is anticipate the biggest themes that will come up at the event, and anticipate what the discussions will be, and maybe sort of debunk a little bit. I mean, that's one thing. You get these bits of consensus emerging, and one of the fun things about both our jobs is to query that consensus. Sometimes it's right, but it just shouldn't be taken at face value. It should always be queried and interrogated and stress tested. So we might do a little bit of that. So I'm just gonna get straight into it, if that's all right with everyone. I don't think you need to be Nostradamus to anticipate that AI is going to be a dominant theme there.
No way.
Really? Never heard of it. What is this
Really?
AI thing?
Yeah, exactly. It's the next big thing. And
it's the next big catch-all term for things that a lot of them aren't really AI.
yeah, and then we're already. I mean, we're already into
lazy-
subdivisions. We're talking less about Gen AI and more about agentic. I mean, I spoke about agentic a bit last year because of some panels I was on, but agentic's obviously a big thing now. And then there's other bits of jargon that go on, like training versus inference and all that sort of thing.
MCP. I had another one this week, which I still don't understand what it means, which was agentic loops.
Is that
Don't know.
maybe
Sounds like
that?
cereals?
So if I had to guess, to have a serious guess, I'd say it's just constant agent-to-agent chatter.
Maybe, or it could also go into this thing, which is the continuous learning, which is everyone seems to sort of think the world neatly fits between training and inference, but I think there's going to be lots of shades of grey and lots of retraining and essentially sort of learning on the job, basically.
Yeah. Well, actually,
agentic loops are the core iterative mechanism in autonomous AI systems that allow them to move beyond single-shot prompt and response interactions to achieve complex multi-step goals.
so it's them not just reacting to your prompt, but having. I'm going to say a word that's going to trigger Ian.
It follows
having
a
a bit of a
cycle
think
of
about it.
observations, reasoning, acting, and reflecting.
Reflecting, reasoning and reflecting.
Dare I say,
reflecting.
Ian's rolling his eyes as I
people are
predicted.
even using this stuff in press releases that are coming around.
I agree with
They're
that.
saying that
And I
things
used
are
it very
using
advisedly,
reasoning.
just because I couldn't think of a better way of expressing it.
Our AI scratched its bin chin for a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
And,
pondering
and
on
twirled
what
its
to do.
moustache.
yeah.
What was I going to say? I on a podcast, I had this anecdote about a woman who had got an AI agent, to deal with her inbox this should be one of these fairly sort of mundane, drudgy tasks that you can trust them to do. But this agent got a bit zealous and just started deleting fucking everything.
Right.
And then she was sitting there. I think she published it on social media, and she was. One of the things that creeps me out about agentic, generative AI, and all that sort of thing is people talking to it in human language, and I know that's good in some ways because it lowers the barriers to access and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But then she starts pleading with it, and she goes, "Why are you deleting all my stuff?" And it just said something like, "Well, it makes sense."
But
and she went, "Well, I don't want you to. I want you to stop doing that," and it wouldn't stop. And anyway, in the end, once her inbox was this smoking ruin, they had a little post-mortem, and it went, yeah, again, I'm paraphrasing, but it went, yeah, I think I got a bit carried away there, didn't I? I won't do it again, sorry. It's too fucking late then, isn't it?
Did she call it Hal? I mean, that's straight out of 2001. I'm afraid I can't do that, Dave.
That is
mad.
But Dean was saying that, I mean, the interaction of natural language makes it feel like that's why I think people sort of extrapolate too much and go, "Oh, it's thinking and it's reasoning," because you're communicating it not with code. You're
creates the impression of.
But like Dean was saying, like
thing.
when he gets it to write reports or something, you're sending it sort of 5 fairly detailed paragraphs with a lot of prompts, the way that you would with an intern or something. But but people going, "Oh, come on, you stupid thing. Why have you done that?" I mean, it's obviously not going to respond to being told something that way.
But isn't it trained to try and respond to natural language, including nuances and slang?
Yeah, it might then refer to sort of stuff online when people are getting worked up about its language.
Like I said, it'll be a screenplay or a transcript of someone shouting at each other. So, basically, if you start talking colloquially, you're probably going to get the screenplay from soap opera.
That's why they generate weird stuff when you start speaking to it.
I'll start using a bit of Cockney slang, and before I know it, it's replying to me like I'm in a 60s Michael Caine film or something.
Well, apparently Grok can do that. There's like a non-safe for work version where it like insults you and
well, Grok's quite good at not safe for work, isn't it? It's kind of cornering that market at the moment, much to the chagrin of regulators. Yeah. So anyway, we're going to talk about that, but we're going to try and resist the temptation to do exactly what we just did now, which is go off on fun tangents and think about what is the actually pertinent, concrete, substantial mobile industry related stuff to do with AI, which I presume will include a fair bit of sort of automation and all that sort of stuff. The stuff that's not so exciting but is probably quite useful.
Yeah. I think there's automation, which is the sort of practical here and now and continually evolving, ties in with what TM Forum does, about how do you essentially take costs out of networks, how do you make them more performant. I think there's a slightly different bit on mobile to do with putting AI deep in the RAN for things like channel estimation and beamforming management and all the rest of it, which is which has a lot of relevance. I know at the Ericsson event last week they were talking about quite a lot of that.
AI4 RAN. And
then there's this sort of agentic stuff, and agentic AI has applicability across the board, whether that's on the sort of OSS, BSS side, whether it's a sort of consumer-facing chatbot, but it could be for AI ops for the operations team as well. Interestingly, I was at an event before coming here, and the AI RAN people are also looking at agentic AI to have agents in the RAN itself. I'm not quite sure how that would work. I was asking the chair of that, Alex Choi. Yeah. One of the challenges I see is that agents, for all their cleverness, are slow. There is actually a lot of latency.
Right. While the agent, for real-time decision making is not so good.
It's not good. Yeah, it has to go away and think about stuff. And then if you've got what's called an MCP server to get access to an API, it's sort of, it exposes the API with language that makes sense to an agent. But again, there's a time it has to go and interpret it because it's all filtered through the language.
Let's put a pin in that and pick up where we left off. I just want to quickly trail the other topics in the intro so that people know what's coming up. We're going to talk about sovereignty because it's a European event. I remember last year, one of the things that loomed large over it was US Vice President J.D. Vance going to the Munich Security Conference and basically saying, Europe, sort your fucking life out. And then
that was just before MWC.
It was. That was last year.
Yeah, and
this year we had Rubio at the conference.
Rubio, who's slightly more conciliatory.
Yeah.
But I think the substance was similar. He just sugared the pill a bit better.
Yeah.
Anyway, and so
he wasn't.
And then everything that's happened since, like Trump banging on about Greenland and that sort of thing, has made everyone think about sovereignty a lot more. So that's bound.
I think it's that, but it's also the European. Well, there's Digital Networks Act, the DNA, which came out in draft a month ago. I was at an event in Brussels last week, and sovereignty came up in lots of different angles. And our last topic, it touches on. But what does it mean for networks? But also, what does it mean for cloud and data?
Cool.
There's a lot of interest as well that comes because of what's going on in Ukraine and also Baltics and Nordics. I'm very interested in sovereignty of the networks, but even things like GPS or timing and
interestingly, I got told that the Ukraine stuff, sovereignty, was almost flipped on its head. It was actually better not to have sovereignty.
Yes,
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
because if you have it in the borders of the country, it's going to get blown up by the Russians.
Well, hold on to that as well, because we'll keep that in your head, because that sounds like a fascinating thing to dig deeper into. And then our final theme for MWC we're going to talk about is going to be satellite. You just mentioned GPS. There was a thing published overnight on the day we're recording this to do with O2 launching the first, I think, European director device thing. So there's quite a lot going there. And my personal feeling is, I don't know if it's massively hyped, but sometimes when people go on about it, I still think, are we losing sight of the fact this is still a very fringe form of connectivity? Anyway, maybe I'm wrong, and we'll get into that. And then maybe I've got something set aside. I've got a little treat set aside at the end for a more self-indulgent...
What, Toblerone?
For a more self-indulgent sort of last segment. So hopefully we'll get to that too. Before we go any further, I'm delighted to announce that this podcast has a sponsor. Unperturbed by our unorthodox style, Cohere Technologies has decided to take the plunge. For any listeners that missed our previous pods with its CEO, Cohere is the innovator behind Universal Spectrum Multiplier software for 4G and 5G, and Pulsone technology for 5G and 6G coexistence, ISAC and NTN. Thanks a lot, Cohere. Your support is much appreciated. So yes, let's go back. Dean, you were just talking about the various forms of AI. I mean, do you want to take them in order?
Yeah, okay. I mean, there's so many different ways in which AI intersects with telecoms and mobile, and that's a day's worth of discussion. But the things I think we'll see in Barcelona, a big focus on automation, and there's people will have slides which make a distinction between automated systems, autonomous systems, and autonomic systems,
right? Which
basically come down to different levels of how much you have a human in the loop or not.
Is this like the levels when they talk about
level 4, level 5 stuff?
It's not quite the same.
It's not analogous to the levels. It's sort of numerical levels,
roughly. But I must admit, I always get a bit confused the difference between autonomous and autonomic, and I know some very, very smart people.
You could be forgiven for that.
Opine at length at that, but
I don't scoff. They'd be like,
I don't know what the difference is now.
Yeah,
I've not even heard the word autonomic used, I don't think, before.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, there you go. There's one.
Wait, automatic or autonomic?
Autonomic.
Both. Yes.
Oh, wow.
No, autonomous and autonomic. We're just...
Anyway,
I'm going to look at myself. Are you doing? Is he doing a? After all these years, is he being young Jamie?
Either way, what I think we'll hear about is that being the pragmatic, frankly smart version of AI without hype. It's essentially a lot of that comes back to the roots of more the machine learning and deep learning. It doesn't have to be Gen AI and LLM driven. It's some of it is, how do I plug in? It's a bit like the stuff that Rakuten does, where you essentially plug in a base station and it self-configures and fires itself up and is online in however many minutes or hours rather than days and weeks. And I think that we're going to see a lot more of that, whether that's for network deployment, network operations, not just on the cellular side, but on the transport networks, and probably some people there talking about it for fixed and fibre, because everyone seems to go to MWC these days, it seems. But I think that will be the relatively hype-free part of AI.
Can I just throw in a little tangent, because you mentioned Rakuten, but I think it's interesting for all their... they've been depicting themselves for quite a few years as the highly automated kind of mobile operator with these, slim lines and a mast, don't have much on them. Everything's kind of centralized RAN, and we don't need that many people to operate it. I think they tried to put a cap on how many people they were using, and yet it doesn't really seem to have translated into it, from what I can see, into any big, advantage for them in terms of the operator.
Are you talking about Rakuten Mobile in Japan?
Well, I'm talking about both. Symphony? I'm talking about both because they're kind of selling their own, dog food, aren't they, or whatever, to flip on it. So
selling
their own
dog food.
They're eating it and selling it. They're kind of the technologies
I've lost track of the analogy here.
The technologies they're using are the ones that they're kind of flogging through Symphony. They're quite unusual in the sense that they've kind of gone and bought vendors and rolled it out, and then they're kind of marketing those. Although Gia makes a lot less it's a lot sort of less visible in a way in terms of this stuff, but they don't seem to have the mobile business is not doing very well, whatever they say. 10 million subscribers is rubbish after a few years in a market of 200 million subscriptions. They're still making a loss, even though they say they're not at the EBITDA level. It might be just about breaking even, but they're still loss making, and Symphony's gone nowhere. It's got one customer which is struggling in Germany and a sort of smattering of other things. And yet they kind of make this big thing about, automation, and it doesn't really seem to have given them any kind of edge that I can see over anybody else.
I mean, we both know, Jeff Hollingworth there. I'll have to check in with him. But I suspect that some of this stuff doesn't have a short timed press release.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suspect there's an awful lot that's going on that they can't talk about. And I don't know if anyone's ever used that term before, time to press release.
Time to press release.
But
you mean by that you mean the sort of delay between the thing happening and then?
You think we might hear big things?
I have no. I'm sorry. I don't have any NDAs or anything there.
Yeah.
But I just think that there's a few areas we look at where we expect to see announcements. In a year or 6 months, and private networks was a classic one where there's a lot going on, but it took a long time there's a long lead time.
No, but that seems to be a theme in telecom, and people sort of wait for years, and we're still like, well, give it time. Before you know it, 6G's coming along, and generative AI's appeared, and the whole world sort of changed. And
I thought it was my job to be the cynical one here, but
I can do my.
Have you met Ian before? Yeah. Turns out I'm the wide-eyed optimist among the three of us.
I was on a call with this isn't under embargo, so I can mention these ones, with Etsy earlier about 6G, and they were saying one of the challenges with the 6G standard at the moment is like exactly what you talked about, AI. AI is moving so fast that it's very, very hard to be locking things down at an early stage in the way that they might have done sort of 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've been, for a long time working on a report on what does AI native mean for 6G, and every time I go back to it, I have to start again because AI has changed since the last time I started looking at it. And so I think that you're right. There's certain things which are going to be bread and butter, but there's a bunch of stuff. Some of the stuff of putting AI deep in the radio network of can we use LLMs to create waveforms on the fly?
Right.
Frankly, is sort of magical thinking. It's in the same bucket as terahertz.
Right.
So I think some of that stuff it's make a great PhD for someone, but it's not going to make it commercially. Whereas I think there's other stuff which is the turning up equipment quickly and optimizing for different configuration. I think one of the things that I've seen. It might have been Rakuten, it might be someone else, was automating the antenna tilt or something like that.
Yeah, I heard them talking about that.
I think there's a bunch of efficiency gains to squeeze out that, there's some of those will be quick wins, some of them will be longer term. One of my wonders as well is whether they are going to improve spectral efficiency on networks to the extent that people don't need as much spectrum as they thought. Which usually makes me unpopular.
Which is a big topic,
various.
By as much spectrum, you mean... Well, less need to use the higher frequency stuff,
or less need for more auctions. I mean, if you've got a sequence of enhancements to 5G and then 6G radio, and each one, this one gives us 10%, and that's 20%, and this is 15%, and you add it up, and it's actually not very different to the forecast traffic growth.
Yeah.
Now, and whether they all stack, who knows? But there's a fair number of those which look to me as if they're independent, and I think that if you actually take that out of the what networks need in terms of future spectrum, and you then factor in we're going from 4 to 3 and 3 to 2 mergers, so you probably need you've got few. So if you say each operator needs 100 megahertz or 200 megahertz, but we've only got 3 operators now rather than 4, and they're all more efficient.
And they're closing down 3G, and they have the spectrum they can refarm from that.
I mean, I think that's a really good point. Anytime now I hear some announcement about, oh, isn't it exciting, this new tranche of high-frequency spectrums being made available, I'm totally meh about the whole thing, because we know it's not very useful spectrum relatively anyway. We know... Like,
what they say.
Well, quite. Well, they're talking shit.
Whereas we're talking from an inside room with 2 glass walls, which are from the outside, and frankly, you wouldn't get anything in here.
Yeah, we're completely reliant on Wi-Fi in here, and so yes, the propagation characteristics obviously aren't great. And then if William Webb was here, he'd say that traffic's barely going up anyway. And all that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm completely with you. I think anytime anyone wants to big up a new tranche of spectrum, to me, that they're not going to get
one
much
interesting
interest.
thing is the conversation about the uplink, which has emerged as a bit of a theme. And I again, the Etsy guy I spoke to earlier, because Ericsson made quite a big deal about this in their presentation. The Etsy guy basically said, well, there's nothing wrong with using 5G for the uplink. It's just the way they've apportioned their spectrum is to focus on the downlink, and there's a lot of actually capacity that could be used for uplink. It's just that it hasn't really taken off in a 5G services setting.
You can reconfigure it.
You can reconfigure.
And you can change the uplink downlink bias. To be honest, to be fair to Ericsson, that was the first time I've actually seen some hard evidence of uplink growth, and they put a good chart up, which
They did, although the guy I spoke to on the Etsy side seemed to be a bit more sceptical of there being a massive sort of growth, and it's from a low level. So when you say 3 times,
it might go from 2080 to 2575 or 1090 or something like that. So I'm not sure that we're going to come back and have this conversation in 10 years' time. It's, we're on 50-50. Who would have thought of that?
But I just think it's weird that they're trying to draw a kind of make 6G out to be an uplink thing. It's like, well, there was nothing wrong with 5G as an uplink thing.
So anyway, coming back to MWC, I don't think we're going to hear quite as much about 6G or about spectrum, apart from a few people being happy about what the DNA and Brussels is talking about with indefinite licenses.
Okay.
So the mobile industry seems to be relatively happy at the moment on spectrum issues, so I think it's going to be downplayed relative to these other topics.
One thing, when you talk about uplink just now, and I was slightly distracted by something that came in my computer, so I might not have heard some of what you said, but Ericsson was obviously going on about that a fair bit at the thing we all attended.
Yeah.
And one thing I got, I think, from chatting to Per Narvinger, was he was saying, and again, you have to view this through a who's it benefit. In this case, it will be Ericsson, won't it? Because they're talking about it. But he's going, it's not just as simple as flicking a switch. Let's say right now your radio is doing 20%, 80% downlink, 20% uplink. You can't just twist the dial on that. It does require a much more fundamental bit of fucking about in the...
Yeah, but it doesn't require 6G.
Yeah.
No, certainly not. No. Certainly not.
But I mean, also, you can't do it locally. So you might think, well, I've got a factory with lots of video cameras and telemetry sending stuff to the cloud, but I'm next to, a housing area with everyone watching downstream, Netflix and Instagram videos. You can't say, well, that cell's going to be 2080 and that one's going to be 8020.
Yeah. It's got to be the whole network.
Because otherwise you get a huge interference.
Yeah.
One of the reasons for private 5G in little islands is you can tune that ratio locally to your port or your factory or your warehouse without having to worry about your neighbours.
So that's quite a big argument in favour of it. No, that's good. Sorry, I just wanted to butt that in because I knew you were talking about it and I was wondering if that had come up. So what was that tangent? Where were we?
We were halfway through AI, so autonomous and automation.
Oh, by the way, I looked up...
Autonomic.
So autonomic, it rang a bell from my my microbiology degree because it's usually used to refer to the nervous system.
Yeah.
And the autonomic nervous system is the reflexive one. So you still got to have nerves, for example, to act as biological pacemakers for your heart. And talking about reflexive, you could even argue that reflexes are part of the autonomic nervous system. But it's basically part of the nervous system that makes everything function. And you don't have to think about it. You're not consciously in your head going, oh shit, I better wake up my liver today and make sure it's on the game, sort of thing. On its game, not on the game.
So that's actually closer to what you were saying with agents before, where it's like, oh, by the way, I did this thing, and they tell you about it afterwards. It's not human in the loop, it's human after the loop.
So I haven't seen a definition as applied to AI, so I'm kind of guessing that if they're using autonomic in the same way it's used in biology, I guess they mean very embedded agentic behaviour.
And a sort of without a human oversight.
It's just baked in. Maybe that's your AI native or one definition of it.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is that then conflicts with some of the regulatory requirements on AI and networks. You need observability, reversibility, sort of auditability, all of that stuff.
More control over it.
Whereas if you wake up in the morning and the robot said, I reprogrammed the network overnight, why? Well, you don't need to know that.
Right.
Then you can't.
Because I'm cleverer than you, so just get in your box and shut up.
Yeah.
And by the way, I mean, autonomous we're more familiar with, but dictionary definition coming up from Google is having the freedom to govern itself or control its own affairs. So this is in the same ballpark, as you'd expect with two words that sound so similar. They're very similar in meaning, but it's interesting that that you found them used differently, so they must have slightly different applications. But autonomous, we understand, it's basically going over to you AI, you've got this. But maybe it's slightly less embedded.
Yeah.
I mean, I listened to one podcast where they were addressing some of the more dystopian sort of Terminator, I don't know why I nearly said Transformers, Terminator type of stuff. And they're going, look, the thing is with AI, it can't take over because you just unplug it. And I always thought that's a massive oversimplification of it. Like AI is just one box with a plug into the wall. The whole part of the whole point of the Terminator dystopian thing is that you can't just unplug it because it's too embedded in everything.
Yeah, although there's some hard limits on it, not least of which, as we're finding out, is power. So, if AI...
Matrix has got that covered, mate.
Yeah, AI is not going to be, changing the planning regulations. Yeah, it's got to stand in the 10-year queue along with everyone else, to get connection to the grid. Or planning permission and consent for building a data center wherever, or what. It's not like they're suddenly going to sort of have their own AI lobbying firm that changes things overnight. So
although it is massively affecting politics, all that planning and all that sort of thing. You're getting obviously lots of sort of local, whether you want to deride them as NIMBY or justified. But just to quickly say one other thing, I listened to a podcast where they were talking about Donald Trump's State of the Union address, which apparently went on for 2 hours. Of him droning on about how great he is at everything or whatever he said. But
we're winning too much.
Yeah. Although there was one, they were taking the piss out of mass. He goes, the price of drugs has gone down 400, 500, 600%. And they were like, how do you drop a price by 600%? Does that mean where I used to pay you this much, you now pay me 5 times that much?
He doesn't understand percentages.
Yeah, exactly. He meant to say X rather than percent. And probably just single figures. But he was talking about data centers and how companies are increasingly going to build their own power. There's always talk of modular nuclear power plants and all that sort of thing. And how...
Yeah, because it's that easy.
And how it'll come... In no cost, it'll actually make it cheaper for everyone because they'll give it away. Because these companies are well known for just giving shit away.
Yeah.
But anyway, retrieving that tangent, the energy part of it is... a major part of it, but I can see there being enormous pressure to just facilitate planning and just allow these AI companies to build fucking massive power plants and data centers.
At which point you would imagine that we would see lots of sort of persuasive AI-generated YIMBY, not NIMBY, stuff, and I don't see it. So all I can say is the AI needs a better lobbying association, which might involve humans to actually have drinks and dinner with people rather than just putting stuff on social media.
Can I just go back to something before we go into AI more deeply? But just this 6G uplink story and the business of the spectrum that gets awarded. I mean, there's sort of 2 systems that are in use, aren't there? There's TDD spectrum, where you use the same spectrum channel essentially for uplink and downlink, and then you get these FDD bands.
FDD is the historic ones.
Yeah. Now here's
one up, one
down. So this is the thing. When they talk about there's a certain amount of flexibility in terms of how you apportion your spectrum, as far as I understood it, there was always one channel that gets awarded for the uplink and one channel that gets awarded for the downlink, and therefore it would seem to me that a lot of this FDD uplink stuff is just sitting there, not really being used. And
that's exactly what Per said to me, actually.
And therefore, why can't we sort of take advantage of that with existing systems?
That's a really good question. And the other question I've got is, do any of the new radio technologies make the threshold at which you choose to do FTD and TDD? Does it bring it up or down?
Right.
Because historically you used FDD on lower frequencies, sort of below 2 gigahertz typically.
Yeah.
And then above that, more TDD. 2.6 is about the break even.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that's flexing. And I think it's one of the Canadian spectrum bands. They're doing a consultation at the moment to whether to convert it from FDD to TDD.
Okay.
So can I want to say what my understanding of the two are to people listening who don't know these two things. I'm going to say my understanding for you two who presumably know it better.
Do you know what the best
than I do.
analogy is? I hope you're going to use it.
I'll use it. Let's just give it a go. I'm quite happy to make a fool of myself if I got it totally wrong. But FTT is like having 2 lanes on a road, two one-way.
You've got to use a road analogy.
I've got to use, okay, I'm using
and the other one's
analogy.
traffic lights.
And the other one's traffic lights, except it's a bit more complicated than that because there's only one road and actually cars could drive into each other were it not for the traffic lights.
Yeah.
Because you basically got uplink and downlink happening on the same channel.
Road.
Yeah, single lane road, but somehow the cars don't smash into each other because of cleverness.
Well, because of the traffic lights.
It's probably because atoms and photons are very different.
It's timing slots.
Oh, here we are, physics boys going deep. Explain why.
It's like it's a bit like all these analogies of people talking about fluids and liquids and things flowing through networks, whereas actually there's a big difference. Oh god! Yeah.
Have you heard on the pod every time we talk about pipes we name check you?
Exactly. Whereas the nice thing about
how's he doing? Oh, he's going in.
Light or electromagnetic waves is whilst you do get interference, you can have firstly multiple different wavelengths.
So they're not like cars in that they can kind of pass through each other. They're more like ethereal cars or something. Yeah. By the way, I've got to say, Ian couldn't find his usual beer, so he just went fuck it and bought something called Life and Death IPA, which is 6.5%. So he didn't have it first up, but he's going in now. So I guess we'll find out in about 20 minutes whether it is life or death. Do you need another?
Yeah, go for one of those.
Okay.
Very, very British Marks and Spencers.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, we didn't call out your beers.
British Marks and Spencers American Pale Ale. So it's a transatlantic ale.
You can just imagine the M&S person saying American with a very slight, barely perceptible sneer on their face. Yes, I suppose we'll have to drink American today.
Slightly strange taste, actually. Yeah.
Well, describe it. It's just a bit more full on, I guess.
Yeah.
It would be at 6.5%. You're not having one.
It's like fruitiness. That's
no. Actually, you got to be a good boy after this, haven't you? Okay. So
so does he. Yeah.
So does he. That's not stopping him. I know. We won't see you speaking.
You always
to
ask more interesting questions when you've had a couple of beers. I always feel.
I think so. Yeah. I can think of very few downsides to having a couple of beers before doing anything, except driving
a car, flying a plane.
Yeah, anything like that. But other than that,
operating any dangerous
machinery, that's a guaranteed winner.
Definitely heart surgery, yeah.
Although even then, if you're inclined to have an unsteady hand, you just loosen up. You just go, yeah, whatever, I'll do.
Right.
Okay. So yes, that was autonomous networks and all that sort of thing. Were there subdivisions within AI that we got?
One other important aspect
on the autonomous networks things. Before you do that, what's the difference between these levels? When you get up to 4 and 5, I'm not really clear on what the difference is. And where are we at the moment anyway with all this stuff?
I don't know.
Right.
If Dean doesn't know, then no, we're fucking.
And to be honest, it's one of those areas where my eyes start to glaze over a little bit. I know it's really important, and I know there's lots of people looking at it, and I leave it up to them because, frankly, there's other stuff that I want to talk about.
Well, but it's a good point. If they haven't done a great job of explaining it, every now and then we'll get a press release of going, it's great, this technology will help us go up a level, but they don't explain why I care. So anyway,
Yeah, no,
Level 5 sounds like you almost don't have anybody involved in running the network.
the whole thing is based on this. It came from the vehicles side of it, autonomous vehicles, and everyone's like tried to jump on that, and say we need to have something which is equivalent to the vehicle descriptions. And I suspect it comes down to the sort of level 5 being, lights out. You don't need anyone in your network operations center. Sort of some of the stuff that Elisa and others do. But don't quote me. I've got a lot of respect for TM Forum, but I don't quite understand how all those levels work. To be fair, I haven't spent lots of time looking at it.
I googled it, and the company with the best SEO on this is Ericsson. And they've got a big old piece talking about it. They don't get into the levels till way down in the piece, but then I did find a little chart where they've got a chart where the x-axis is degree of automation, the y-axis is business performance potential. Needless to say,
up and to the right.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to quickly read them out. So 0 is manual ops and maintenance. 1 is assisted ops and maintenance. 2 is partial. None of this is very helpful. Number 2 is partial autonomous networks. Number 3 is conditional autonomous networks. I like that, conditional. They're like only if you're good. No, you've been bad. No autonomy for you. 4 is
transactional autonomy.
4 is highly autonomous network, and 5 is fully autonomous. Ericsson, that doesn't shine much light on it, I'm afraid. Anyway, carry on. That's the best we're getting.
Highly autonomous versus.
So it's obviously just degrees of handing over the keys to the
I think when you get to level
AI.
4, I get the feeling that there's still people sort of involved saying, do that, do this. Whereas level 5, it's like, no, let the machines take over.
Right, you reckon that's the singularity?
Well, that's my difference. But
so that's the difference in highly. Well, yes, that's true. But highly and fully feels like a big jump.
Yeah.
Well, fully is absolute, isn't it?
Yeah, you've just got...
Fully is just go to the pub.
You've just got Margarita at Vodafone with her legs up on the table having a coffee while the whole thing just runs itself.
Exactly. Just thinking, God, I can't believe I get paid for this.
Exactly. Just text you how much money you make. Right. So, agentic AI meet network APIs. So, for the last 3 years, we've had APIs being a centerpiece of MWC, with GSMA and Kamara. There's been a bunch of other API initiatives in the telecoms industry for the last 15 years at least, but this was the sort of standardized mobile APIs, whether it's the fraud management, whether it's the location and this sort of quasi-mystical quality on demand in future. And what we are going to like to see is more discussion around whether... And I did a workshop on this a month or so ago, whether AI agents are going to be the customers for the APIs.
I see.
Which is, you actually ask, let's say you're a financial services company, a retail company, you might ask your agentic AI system is, rate this transaction in terms of fraud risk. And it might do a whole bunch of stuff. And one of those things it could do is ask the phone network, or has this person done a SIM swap? Do we trust their identity? Is the phone in the same place as the credit card? And so at that point, the agent, which might also have gone to your credit history on Experian and a bunch of other scoring things, it might well then rock up to either an individual telco or an aggregator and go, what are your fraud indicators for this transaction? Should we trust this person? And then, at that point, if you like, the customer is the AI agent, which has gone and asked for it.
Right.
And so I think, there's various levels and layers of that type of thing, but it's that type of thing where it's the agent that's invoking it, because the agent's been given an intent, and the intent could be check this for fraud risk. It could be make my video work better. Yeah. Or it could be make my
the agent to work out how best to do that.
Where do these agents come from?
They come from OpenAI and
financial services
and all that
company,
sort of thing.
So they build their own agents.
A lot of financial services companies are going to have agentic systems. You're already getting this for things like chatbots for sort of customer service.
But they're based obviously on a platform that's provided by someone else.
Yes.
So that's a good point. I answered just the usual LLM kind of companies, but is there a whole different layer of people who just make agents? They're not doing the LLMs.
I think there are, and there's different sorts of agents. Some of them are sort of agents which are replacing or similar to human type roles. So you might have the HR agent, you might have the credit scoring agent, you might have the...
God, can you mention an HR agent?
You might have the editor of Telecoms.com agent.
How dare you, sir? We shall settle this afterwards.
And there's a lot of discussion about
drinks a lot of beer.
Whether the agents are essentially like, and I hate this. You know how much I hate the word digital, so you can imagine the term digital workforce makes me cringe.
Yeah.
But there's also more.
Use it anyway.
There's like software agents which are more task-oriented things. The example that I heard, which in telecoms, but in an area that I didn't really understand, was for submarine cables. And someone said, imagine you're the operator of a submarine cable and there's a cable break at 3:00 in the morning. And, these things happen. There's like a few times a month, but any one operations engineer probably doesn't have a lot of experience. And there's probably some dusty folder on the shelf of, like, take the folder off the shelf, start flicking through of, like, what do I do now in the op center? And instead, you could potentially ask the agentic system there is a cable break between here and here.
Sort it the fuck out.
And then you have one agent might go to the maintenance and operations system and get the nearest ship heading in the right direction and all of the spare parts. Another one might go to the policy and regulatory system and work out that's the minister for communications between the country A and country B. You probably ought to wake them up and tell them there's a problem.
He might be an agent as well. And
then one goes to the CRM system and then comes back with, these are the top 10 customers affected, the phone numbers of the account manager, So at that point, for me, that made it real.
Well, and it's interesting what Ian just said there as an aside. When you were talking about the APIs, the users of the APIs being agents, it made me think of a couple of things. More immediately, API stands for Application Program Interface, doesn't it? And it's basically the way it's the software layer where a third party can get access to a system. A classic example of APIs being opening up the APIs for smartphones, which then enabled things like Uber and all that sort of thing. Because then through that API, Uber could get access to your GPS and
your phone work,
your billing and all that sort of thing. And then so maybe these network APIs will end up being written primarily for agents, and that begs the question to which I couldn't even begin to answer. Do APIs for agents, are they different from APIs for humans?
Yes, and one of the things that you're starting to find is there's another technology called MCP, standing for Model Context Protocol, which basically makes APIs agent readable. By having a standardized language for what the API does. At the moment, there's this whole thing about how well documented is your API, and everyone does their own documentation with more or less granularity and quality. Having MCP is a standardized way of how the hell does this API actually work in a way that the agent can then read it.
So does that overlap with Kamara, or is it in...
No, in fact, it's not. Kamara put a paper out on MCP a few weeks ago, which I wrote a review on, and essentially, it's not as easy as it sounds, but it's essentially it's a starting point. And there's a bit of a debate in the telecoms industry as to whether we're going to need a telecom specific flavour of MCP with all the security guardrails and all the rest of it. I'm a bit sceptical of that because everyone thinks they're special. So do you need an MCP for the energy industry, an MCP for the finance industry, and an MCP for the healthcare industry? At which point, there's no point having a standard because you've got 27 different versions. Thing.
And you're going to want ideally, you're going to want agents, as you were just describing with your submarine cable thing, to be able to flit between different environments.
So MCP, I think it was Anthropic that invented it about a year and 4 months ago, and it's become the sort of semi-standard for the way in which agents talk to APIs. There's another thing which Google's done, which is the way agents talk to each other, called A2A.
Right.
But I've already started seeing press releases talk about MCP. There's been a few that have come out in the last few weeks.
It rings a bell.
So I think that's, if you like, the glue between the AI agents and network APIs. Now, is this suddenly going to mean that Kamara and Open Gateway explodes into sort of being the next Amazon or Twilio or whatever? Not overnight. Is it an important part of the puzzle? Possibly yes, but it's like a lot of the things I see on the APIs, it's sort of necessary but not sufficient. And I think that the key thing for me, and we'll be very curious, and this is a little bit outside of AI, but it's one of the things to watch for in Barcelona is, are people creating solutions around the APIs? It's not this idea of buying an API. I don't think it's more that someone will create the fraud management solution. consumes the telecom APIs underneath the hood, or they have a video quality management system, part of which might be requesting, you're doing a podcast in the middle of a festival, can I get an uplink?
Yeah, it's just demand driven, not supply driven.
But it would be it's the sort of, I've got the broadcasting app, or it's maybe embedded in TikTok or Instagram or something like that. And the question is whether telcos can do the products rather than just the APIs.
Right.
I'm going to be. I'll let you say that, but I'm just going to say in advance I'm going to be a bit stricter on time than I normally am, just because we've got so much to cram in. And in a sec, I'm going to try and move it on from the AI thing, but I'll give both of you a chance to mention anything that we haven't mentioned yet.
Well, the whole because APIs was a theme, obviously, at the Ericsson event when they got Nicholas Herveld up on stage, and I noticed he got asked about the $100 billion to $300 billion figure, and I thought it's quite interesting. He went, well, forget about the upper end of that, but we're still quite confident about the lower end of it, which even that to me sounds like a huge amount of money. I mean, you look at some of the...
Was that annual revenues for APIs?
Yeah, that's what the McKinsey figures were.
Right.
But I think a lot of their idea is that, I think if you're trying to be fair to them, that it's a small amount of that's to do with the actual API transactions. It's the pull through of additional service usage, which I've always been quite sceptical of, because when I've asked him about this before, he's gone, it's really all about the quality on demand stuff, to be honest.
The issue is that they put everything in the kitchen sink and then attribute it all to one small ingredient. So if you're imagining you're doing a drone with a video camera, and you say, there's going to be the drone as a service market is worth 20 billion or whatever the number is, and it will rely on quality on demand, but it also relies on the drone and the camera and the analytics application and the other 100 parts. And if you said, and we think APIs contribute 4% of the overall value stack, then fair enough. But if you sort of take ownership of that whole thing, ignoring the fact that someone actually has to create a flying machine.
Yeah, and with all due respect to people like McKinsey, if they're paid by someone who they know has an interest in that number being as high as possible, they're likely to tweak it in that direction.
I think the APIs...
I think I was being too delicate there. I should have been more scathing.
I've been very scathing in the way that they've actually had to go at me on LinkedIn before. So,
I know. I'm very gripping. I get on very well with him. I disagree with his numbers on some of that, but I mean, the APIs, with your framing of it, with how it sort of interacts with AI, I just feel that I felt this ever since Ericsson started talking about this APIs topic when it bought Vonage, and then we had Aduna, and then you've got things like Kamara in the mix, and it all sounds... If you try and... I remember talking to an equity analyst at Ericsson's event a couple of years ago, and he went, this is all absolutely mystifying and overly complicated. And to me, one of the things that I would expect might be useful that we see out of AI is just simplify the whole thing, where it's not all this... It just seems like there's too many middlemen trying to get a bit of money from bits of this value chain. Definitely are on APIs, where you've got the telcos, you've got software companies working with the telcos, then got maybe aggregators, which could be Aduna, or Nokia.
Everybody wants their penny.
Then you've got maybe a layer of systems integrators and CPaaS providers, and then maybe there's a cloud hyperscaler. Then you've got a software developer, and then you've got an enterprise.
Totally.
And you're like, I'm not sure everyone's going to make money out of that.
Yeah.
And also, when that happens, it sets the scene for some disruptive US startup to then go past several layers of that chain and offer the same thing or a similar thing much cheaper.
With AI.
Speaking of AI. So I asked, and here's a number if you really want to be unfair to people next week, is I asked ChatGPT to estimate how many T-shirts and pizzas Twilio has given to developers since it started. And it basically estimated 300,000 T-shirts and 150,000 pizzas with some error margins.
I didn't know Twilio gave pizzas away. I missed that memo.
I strongly suspect that if you ask for the aggregate mobile industry pizza count, it's an order or two of magnitude lower.
So they're over-delivering on pizzas.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Dean, I think at this stage, I think at the end of each segment, I think it'd be really useful to get you to just... I'm going to put you on the spot and just go, look, just distill it down. They're going to be going on about this at the show. What's substance and what's fluff in terms of, when you're looking at it. What are you keeping an eye out for that'll be real, and what are you more likely to just disregard as hyperbolic or whatever?
Okay, on the autonomous network side, I think it's never mind the level 4, 5. I want to actually have some decent data of this is what it looked like before, this is what it looks like now, and we can attribute it to these factors.
And this is why it's good.
And it's saved us this money, or it's done this thing faster. But you can actually put some numbers on that. Or if it's for a greenfield, we have built a network with 3 men and a dog, and it's got 1 million cell sites or whatever the number is. But let's have some numbers and some case studies rather than use cases. I think is a key thing there. I think on the
by case study you mean something that's actually happened, whereas use case is more theoretical.
Absolutely. I think on the agentic AI side of it, I'd like to see some more specificity. And is this running in production? And I think the key word there is production, because there's an awful lot of demos, there's an awful lot of test beds, there's an awful lot of conceptual ideas. But if it's saying we've got 3,500 developers using this platform, and each one has created 4 applications on average and has deployed them wherever, that would be really cool. And I think that the question is develop active developers or ship product would be a really good one to have. And then the last one, which didn't really talk about on AI.
Did you say SHIPPED there? Because it sounded like you said shit product. Is it rubbish
shipped.
Product?
Shipped. Yeah.
I heard it too, yeah.
Do the agents create other agents? Maybe we don't need the developers to build agents. They just build their own agents.
That's the second matrix when he multiplies himself. Yeah,
possibly. Sorry. There's probably something that you could get.
Agent Smith.
We're in open claw territory, which I don't really understand.
We had that chat when it was still called Maltbot.
Right.
Well, I mean, that's been hopefully.
It's the same thing, is that?
Yeah. They had to
rebrand it 3 times.
Yeah, because it was originally called Open Claude or something, and then understandably, Anthropic went, "Hold on a sec, our thing's called Claude."
This is where the AIs hang out together.
Allegedly.
That was the thing. I mean, in practice, it wasn't anywhere near that, but it was still enough. See, this is the interesting thing, and hopefully we'll get time for this in the final segment. We're at an interesting stage, and I'll be self-disciplined here, but we're at an interesting stage where hypotheticals are moving stock markets quite profoundly. All someone's got to do with a little bit of reputation behind them is go, shit, this could happen, and then suddenly the stock markets all go crazy, which to me is symptomatic of a bubble. But anyway, I'll get back to that at the end.
Okay.
I interrupted your flow.
That's all right. Yeah, I was busy doing some insider trading based on my own prognostications. The last one on what to look for AI is the sort of the nitty-gritty in the RAN or in the radio side of it, where I think that's where we will see the mentions of this is sort of quasi 6G or the roadmap to 6G stuff.
A lot of conflation between 6G and AI will go on.
Yeah, but I think where it's in the nuts and bolts of the RAN of there'll be like. Oh, you're my friends at Cohere and others who are actually doing clever stuff with waveforms and beams and channel estimation and all of that sort of complicated maths in the radio. So anything which is a real advance that gets announced next week, or if it's deployment, even better. I think that's not. It's not going to get the headlines, but that points us to a trajectory of.
It will from me.
Yeah. But in terms of making...
He's talking about normies, not extra super duper journalists.
But it's like aligning with sort of the release 18 and 19 and stuff like that of, is there stuff in the wild that's doing this? And I know Ericsson talked a little bit about it recently and certainly the other vendors as well, but I'd like to see a bit more on that.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. I'm going to move it on. Another theme, as we just trailed at the start, is sovereignty.
Yes.
Now, just like with AI... sovereignty seems to require a lot of qualification.
There's a good overlap.
Yeah. Seems to require a lot of qualification, a lot of subdivision, and all that sort of thing. So I'll give it straight back to you, Dean, as you flagged this up as a key theme. Why are we talking about sovereignty? And perhaps could you I don't know, jargon bust it a little bit in this context.
Sovereignty is a hot topic, especially in European discussion and some other parts of the world, about reducing risk and exposure to technology or political outlier events.
Dodgy foreigners.
There is certainly a risk we've had for a long time, or a perceived risk from certain Asian vendors, which we know. But there's also a bit of a fear in Europe that the critical systems for government and finance and healthcare are becoming dependent, whether it's on cloud or on other elements of the supply chain that may have issues where they could be removed. Now, the sort of the personification, if you ask people, what does this look like, is we're really worried about a big red button in the White House, which someone can press,
or in whatever the Chinese equivalent of the White House. Where does Xi Jinping live? What is the Chinese White House? Is it the Red House?
No one knows.
We'll call it the Red House.
In a bunker.
But yes, but red button in either place.
So there's and it withdraw the metaphorical red button, which will stop you getting access to this cloud server or that piece of software. That's the sort of
Zhongnan. That's what it's called.
Oh wow, no, I like the pronunciation there. Good skills.
Zhongnan.
That's the emblematic sort of perceived risk. But in a more specific case, it's about. Well, firstly, there's the sort of the big red off switch, but then there's also the where is my data, and can I control that? And so you can imagine that for a government IT system or for financial services, healthcare, military, public safety, all energy, utility grids, you don't want to have extraterritorial storage or ideally even access to your data. So there's data sovereignty. And then there's a whole set of discussions around supply chain.
Yeah.
And realistically, most countries in Europe, particularly smaller ones, we're not going to have our own GPU. There's not going to be a Belgian NVIDIA anytime soon. And frankly, there may not be European fabs even for it. But we can start looking at this is where you get the UK's framework, where the supply chain diversification, where you can at least mitigate that risk. So I think people are looking at what the supply chain risks are. Can
I ask you something on that? Do you think it's realistic for not European countries like Belgium, but a China or a US to have its own supply chain end to end? So the reason I ask is
autonomy.
But the US does very well on the sort of chip design front and cloud companies. But if you talk to people like Lum about where the passive components come from, printed circuit boards, it's all China.
Nearly all manufacturing, full stop, isn't it?
China is, not necessarily the manufacturing, but for low level stuff like that. And China's like almost the other way around, but actually seems to be doing quite a good job now of moving up towards some of these other areas. But could they both realistically have their own?
I think they will I think they will for certain.
Because that puts Europe in an awkward position. Then I think if that happens,
and I think there's an awareness in, and I heard Henna Virkkunen, who's the European.
She's got one of those weird ass titles.
She basically, it comes down to technology and sovereignty. And I think technology, sovereignty, and democracy. And I heard her speak at an event last October, and she spent probably a lot more time talking about sovereignty than she did talking about telecoms.
Right.
And even within telecoms, most of it was about things like subsea fibre and things like that, rather than fixed broadband or wherever. And so I think that you can create sovereign supply chains for things like military components, where you're probably less cost conscious. And if you have to create a small factory making, small semiconductors for particular purposes at 100x the price you could get them off of Alibaba, then you just do it. And I think you're starting to see that more in the cloud domain as well, where there is an increasing attempt to have a certain amount of European independence from particularly US vendors. But that only really works where you have users and software developers that you can exert control over. So you can probably tell your military you're not going to use Teams and Zoom, you're going to use French or German equivalent, whatever it's called.
Le Zoom.
And you can probably tell your developers in the military you're not going to use Azure, you're going to use
Blur.
But that's not a good example.
Because that's actually a thing, isn't it?
Microsoft.
Right.
Yeah. But or you can have these sort of interim partnerships where it's Google partnering with Thales, for example.
By the way, Pierre's was better. Coat does a...
Yeah.
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 The delayed laughter.
Yeah. The delayed, tempered laughter.
That is really good.
That's his great banter. The chuckle.
So I think you can have overall stack sovereignty if you really, really work at it. But you can't. You're not going to go to a retailer who's got 100 developers who are used to using AWS and they've got all their existing systems. And you go, sorry, you have to switch that off next week. Yeah. That's not going to happen. Yeah, particularly with an international retail company.
It was reminiscent of a thing we spoke about on a previous pod where Microsoft that time went, don't worry, everyone, even if Trump loses his shit, we've got your back, sort of thing. Yeah. Because, the American companies, the interests of the American companies are obviously not necessarily completely aligned with the interests of the American state.
Yeah.
And that was a clear example of them trying to draw a dividing line there. Like, we are our own people. We're autonomous.
It's basically risk management. It's a geopolitical flavour of risk management, all of this. And I think that each company, each government function is going to look at a combination of supply chain, how the data is controlled, what platforms it uses, whether there are dependencies you don't expect, for example, on GPS satellites for timing. So one of the big risks for sovereignty at the moment is we all use, well, firstly, GPS is an American system, but secondly, it's jammable by Russians. And if you live in the Baltics or Nordics, you're very aware that your GPS is unreliable, so you're trying to create sovereign timing systems, terrestrial timing systems.
You're trying to find a way to the pub and you end up in a gulag because they've been dicking about.
Yeah. And there's certain parts
We've
of the
all
world
been there.
Yeah.
Is the sovereignty thing, which is a big topic in the cloud, but we were just talking about...
Telecoms.
Yeah, well, telecoms as well, but I was just thinking what the previous thing we were discussing, agentic AI and where these technologies come from and the platforms that it all rests on. To me, because the conversation's very much about, moving towards these networks that don't really need very many people, but we're relying very heavily on technologies that come from US big tech. That doesn't sound like a very sensible move if you're concerned about sovereignty. But
totally.
I mean, you can be a sovereign Luddite very easily. Go and live in a cave, right?
Yeah.
You've got perfect sovereignty. You live in a cave. You grow your own vegetables. You hunt your own animals. You're sovereign.
Air-gapped laptop.
Unfortunately, we currently live in the 21st century, so somewhere on this continuum between sovereign caveman and non-sovereign AI citizen, you have to decide where on that.
But the AI thing sounds really quite worrying to me.
Yeah, but it's a good point. And one thing I was going to say about sovereignty is, Dean was making a good point about the many calculations and considerations and trade-offs that we have to do. I mean, ultimately, in a really big picture way, talk of sovereignty feels like an attempt to slightly retreat from full globalization. And one of the advantages of full globalization are these optimal supply chains where you've got a very fairly frictionless option to derive whatever it is, services, goods, from wherever you want, that it delivers. It's the comparative advantage thing on steroids.
Free trade.
And what we're saying is that we're going to ignore some comparative advantage and we're going to go for some more expensive options in the name of sovereignty. And my question is, and this is more a sort of political economic question than it is anything to do with telecoms, but who makes those decisions? Because private enterprise by itself is nearly always going to go for the most cost-effective option. So then do we have to have more forceful regulatory intervention in the name of sovereignty?
Well, there's two things. Firstly, private enterprise, sometimes they'll look for lowest cost, but they also look for some are more long-term than others.
Right. And risk
and especially if you're publicly quoted or you have investors with, you're doing all your risk disclosures when you do your returns, I'd be like, well, actually, there's geopolitical risk that actually reduces our valuation by X% unless we've got this, we can prove resilience.
Yes.
So
in those bits towards the end of their quarterlies where they go, the shit might hit the fan.
Basically, exactly. And so it does. It's not all about lowest cost that I can order today. If that essentially you've got investors asking awkward questions. So I think that there is a bit of a corrective there. And I think that sovereignty and resilience are two sides of the same coin here. You often hear them mentioned together. And what you can, and particularly with supply chain, you're like, well, to be honest, we can't make our own GPUs, but we can make sure that we manage the ones. Maybe we've got a sort of GPU recycling program, or we can second source it from this company that's not quite as good. Or so I think that the resilience,
we do what America tries to do. which I don't know if Europe has the capacity or the funds to do it, but it tries to get onshoring, like tries to get TSMC to build fabs in Arizona.
Or Ericsson.
Sort of thing.
Yeah,
or Ericsson. Well, Ericsson, that process with Ericsson was happening way before Trump started banging on about tariffs and all that sort of thing.
I mean, it's an interesting question.
That factory was opened in 2020, so it was kind of the end of the first administration.
Not ages ago, fair enough.
But I mean, one of the things I think that all of this has made us think about are scenarios which were, previously, and I'm going to give a plug here, unthinkable. All right, here's one for you. What happens if we wake up in a year's time and there's Sweden has an election and we have Swedish Trump in office, and he's like starts saying, right, we're not going to be selling Ericsson gear to who we want to. Yeah, it's unlikely.
Yeah,
is it zero probability? Possibly not. Yeah, is it something? Is
a Dutch person who gets all muscular with ASML?
But it's an interesting question that people maybe 100 years ago wouldn't have been having to ask these sorts of questions. It's quite a relatively recent thing in terms of human civilization to suddenly think we've got to this point where telecommunications infrastructure is so vital, and yet it only comes from two companies that we're allowed to use anymore. It's
I think it's something,
and one's not in a very good condition.
I think, and it's one of the reasons why. I mean, I know we talked before about Open RAN and things like that. Interestingly, where I'm seeing Open RAN still having legs is people talking about, certainly private and enterprise networks, but that's always been a little bit of its own market, but also defence and military.
Yeah.
Looking at creating sovereign, whether it's wireless or technology stacks, if you want to have either on a base or for forward deployments, and to some extent you've always had specialist systems for government purposes and also utilities and others, and so now there's a re-emphasis on sovereignty, perhaps using international standards or occasionally open source if it's verified.
Yep.
So I think that we're going to see a bit of a return to that. So I think sovereignty is going to crop up a lot next week, and some of it will just be general flag waving. Some of it will be specific initiatives in Europe. I think we need to be careful to distinguish the sort of cloud and AI sovereignty, which gets 90% of the attention, from what does this mean for telecoms. And there's one of the things I've been starting to think about, because firstly, you're not going to have sovereign networks because of the internationalization of the vendor landscape and standards, and you're not suddenly going to have although people were talking about, are we going to see a split of ITU or rules or 3GPP, we're not there yet. So I think that in terms of technology,
do you need a beer, mate?
I'm okay at the moment, thanks. It's not going to be as sovereign as you might argue for cloud.
Yeah.
And I think the telcos are themselves looking at whether they can be providers of sovereign services to everyone else. And whether that's hosting sovereign cloud, whether it's with a partnership with the US hyperscaler or perhaps a European smaller company, I think it will be more of that. Is it going to succeed? Well, it depends on what the propositions they can do. And also, if it's selling into government, it's more likely to be successful, because I think you'll see a lot more interest in, as well as B2B and B2C, there's B2G. And I think you'll see more interest of governments buying stuff which is varying levels of sovereign and resilient according to some internal scale.
So the only flip side of that is most governments are fucking skint. So they can... I understand that policy-wise and strategy-wise, they're going to want to only buy stuff that's as secure and ideally sovereign as possible, and then they could do little press releases saying we just bought stuff with Union Jacks all over it. Aren't we lovely politicians?
Or we're buying Mistral AI.
Mistral, at least it's French and not American and all that sort of thing. But governments are incredibly budget constrained as well, so there's that balance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which probably just means they won't buy anything and they'll just leave whatever it is with
they'll
the
just
legacy.
Kick the can down the road for the next lot to deal with. That's so unlike them.
Yeah,
Don't get me started.
The sovereignty thing that I'd be almost more worried about is on the AI side of things, because I feel if you get to a point where, I mean, we're going to come on and talk about this with your final section, I think, but this whole idea of companies being a lot leaner in the future, and a lot of those skills have been replaced by agentic AI systems if we go along with that, and it probably happened to some extent. And then the underlying platforms that support all this are are basically concentrated in the hands of a few small companies that are not in Europe, then
I think what we get is, and this is something, if I look at what is going on in 3GPP around 6G, is the idea of sort of model portability. And so you don't necessarily standardize the model, you standardize the interfaces to models with the idea that you can rip and replace Model A with Model B. Right. And so I think that there's a lot more of you end up standardizing the scaffolding. And so if in a few years' time you think, well, actually, I'm not sure I want to trust this vendor, I want to use that vendor, at least in theory, there ought to be the observability, whether you can transfer the training data is another matter, but at the very least, there is work going on in the sort of, the same way with a lot of the containerization and cloud platforms. You have multi-cloud, you have multi-model.
Yeah, but it has been a hard thing to go from. I mean, this is one perennial sort of bugbear of telcos, isn't it? That if you try and take your applications and port them to another kind of infrastructure platform, it's quite a hard thing to do. And these initiatives like Silver that's supposed to overcome that still seems to have been like a problem for sort of years. And I can see the same thing. They complain about it, and yet they're all kind of in bed with the hyperscalers on agentic AI. I can see the same sort of thing.
I'm sure we could have a nice abstraction layer that's created for you by
some single company. Exactly.
But then you get actually, this is perhaps slightly germane to the AI taking over everything discussion. Yes, maybe moving from one hyperscaler to another could be made easier in terms of just the interface. And maybe the portability of your data, but you've probably got into very deep business relationships with them, and maybe you're using some of their bespoke tools that don't, for all the goodwill in the world, easily port from one to another.
Yep.
So it is more. I mean, your point's right. I'm not disagreeing with your point, Dean.
And when you have your
but
scenario,
it is more complicated than just the interface.
And everyone's locked into NVIDIA CUDA as the language southbound to there are multiple layers of lock-ins here. Or if not lock-ins, then friction.
Yeah.
But to some extent, I'm fairly sure if we ask Pierre, you're going to swap over to a new form of microphone or a new editing software, you've probably bought into that for the blog post and for the podcast, and it's probably all right. It's doable to switch to another, but it's we accept a certain amount of lock-in as a trade-off for speed.
They had the same thing with don't ask me why, but I was looking at the service rifle for the U.S. Army, which has been the same for 60 years now, more or less. They're just slightly upgraded, and every time there's a new vendors try to pitch, the government is like, it doesn't only have to be better; it has to be way better for us to even
make them
entertain the idea of changing.
It's all done on US soil, isn't it?
Path dependency effect. I started trying to write a book on that one time. I gave up, but there's an awful lot of reasons why what we do now is not what we would do if we started with a clean sheet of paper. It's because of legacy decisions, install base, experience, supply chain,
economics.
There's all these factors that make it very difficult to change from something which is good enough.
I wonder, recent decisions like the sale of Arm to SoftBank, would that have happened today? I wonder. That was 2017, 2016, 2017. Very different world then.
Oh, yeah.
David Cameron, I think, just about still clinging on maybe when that happened.
My feeling about ARM is it's a kind of a one-off case because of the...
No, I'm just using it as an example, though.
But I know, I just thought I'd pick up on it as it sprung to mind. But because of its business model, which is all about licenses and royalties, it's quite difficult for ARM to abuse its position, because if it does, it's really transparent through the licensing and royalty payment process. But I take your point about national champions and all that sort of thing.
Anyway, next week, definitely there will be a lot of some of it will be sovereignty washing of we're doing X, Y, Z in this country and here's the flag. But there's also going to be a lot of links to the opportunities. So I speak to a number of my clients at the moment are saying we have a product that we think can offer a sovereign, an on-premise version or a national version, and this cuts right across from networks to cloud to communication services. That I think that a lot of smaller companies are really looking to exploit that, because I know there is a demand. I don't quite know how big it is, whether it's selling into the military, whether it's selling into government or utilities and critical infrastructure, or banks, and you start thinking, well, if you're a hospital, do you want to trust something which has dependencies that you can't control? And you could argue that this is going back to the cloud versus on-prem as much as it is national versus offshore. But I think that people's risk calculus is changing, and therefore the types of products and services they'll buy will also change. And so there's an opportunity for new entrants and disruptors to offer stuff, and I think we'll see quite a lot of that.
Well, on the I've heard it said on the sort of BSS OSS side of telecom that whole area is in flux at the moment, partly because of generative and agentic AI, because it makes it quite easy for someone to come along, and this is throwing out our old favourite name, Danielle Rios, that you can come along and basically produce something with hardly any people, or as you used to have these huge teams at Amdocs and Netcracker in the past working on them.
But I mean, think about it. I think it was last week's podcast, or one of them. You had someone who was saying, "Oh, we can use a 6G network and slice it for a utility," and I was like, "Great." So if your 6G network is suddenly underpinning the utilities, electrical grid or whatever, with a slice, you suddenly turn your network into critical national infrastructure, and therefore all the software that runs it into critical national infrastructure. You're
opening up a whole new
you're essentially exposing your entire business and architecture to all of the highest level of AI safety regulation and oversight. And it's not even obvious to me that the utility companies will buy that off you anyway. Whenever I speak to someone in the utility industry, they tend to think of telcos as amateurs. It's like 5 nines, try 7. We've got helicopters on standby to fix stuff.
I laugh at your 5 nines.
Yeah. It was, I remember being in one event, and it was like saying, we've got helicopters on standby to go and cruise, to go and fix stuff. Right. And the rest, all the telcos in the room were suddenly went very quiet and looked at their shoes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got about 40 minutes left and a couple more things we want to cover. I could also do with a quick break. So I can either go by myself and pass the ball to Dean to tee up our last segment, or we can all have a break. What do we want?
Let's have a break.
Let's have a break. Okay, quick one. Let me take this opportunity to once more thank the sponsors of this podcast, Cohere Technologies, which is the innovator behind the Universal Spectrum Multiplier software for 4G and 5G, and Pulsone technology for 5G and 6G coexistence, ISAC and NTN. Nice one. All right. Okay, we're back in the room. The final thing that we want to anticipate is going to be spoken about a fair bit at Mobile World Congress is satellite.
Yeah.
And I'm going to guess specifically within that, obviously LEO, which stands for Low Earth Orbit, which is like a Starlink and all that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And then perhaps even more contemporary is direct-to-device, which has been around for a little while but seems to be ramping in terms of how often it's spoken about. So again, as our guest, I'll throw the ball to you. And I know this is something from following you on LinkedIn. And by the way, I've said this before, but with Dean, he's a great LinkedIn follow. And we were just chatting about your podcast. Plug your podcast, Dean.
I've started doing a podcast about once or twice a month with another analyst, Benoit Felton. Benoit's more of a policy and also fixed and fibre analyst. And we talk about recently things like the European Digital Networks Act, and there's an event in Brussels last week. And we'll normally do about half an hour. At the moment, it's just the two of us. We'll probably have guests at some point in the future when we get our act together.
Right. Half an hour. Cool. A fleeting podcast.
20, we're trying to keep it 20 minutes. Never works.
Right.
And we'll normally have about 3 sections of events. We both go to and speak at a lot of events. There might be a paper or something that's been published.
So you're having to be pretty concise in that podcast.
Reasonably.
Sounds like you're fitting a lot into that time. Anyway, so there's a plug, but also follow Dean if you don't already on LinkedIn, because he's quite active there and puts on some good stuff. And one thing I've noticed that you've commented about not infrequently recently is the satellite and direct-to-device thing, so that's teeing it up for you, mate.
Yeah, no, I'm expecting to hear quite a lot about direct-to-device next week, both in terms of sort of the global trends where you've got companies like Starlink partnering with telcos to offer sort of integrated services, some of the technology side of it with what's called NTN, non-terrestrial networks, 3GPP from release 17 onwards. Supporting devices will probably get quite a lot of traction. And then there's this question, you end up, and this is why I prefer LinkedIn to X or Twitter these days, which is full of space bros who will be like, no, everything will be run from orbit. We'll be,
so these people
we'll
are just,
rip out
they can see no constraints
we'll
on
rip
space
out the fibre, rip out the terrestrial networks. We won't have data
Space
centers.
cowboys.
Space cowboys or Kardashev clowns, because they start talking about Kardashev Type 2 civilizations.
Oh my God, what the fuck is that? You're going to have to explain that.
Oh, this is this scale that someone came up with of advanced. It's basically sci-fi.
Yeah.
It's like I can't remember whether it's Type 1 is when you harness the entire power of your star. And then there's one which is like your entire solar system or whatever it is. And there's something that Musk put in one of his SEC filings about the only way to turn the Earth into a Type 1 or Type 2 Kardashev civilization is if we put all the terawatts of terawatts of compute in space. And now everyone and basically the
turns out he's got a whole business about lobbing stuff into space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about
Along with being a massive bill end.
payload, not petaflops. So basically, he'd love to have 4 or 5 companies trying to build, whether it's not just communications networks, but data centers in space, as long as it involves a couple of million tons to orbit. Frankly, you can put toasters up there. You just do use my rockets for it, please.
And so obviously Musk's self-interest in this is fairly apparent. But the space bros, what is the hype around chucking stuff in space that isn't currently in space?
Oh, it's basically making Earth the reducing dependency on Earth, and this whole turning us into
space is still orbit, yeah? We're not
initially. Well, no, and the moon.
And the moon.
You could say the moon's in orbit, but then there's
but
Lagrange points, which are these places which are sort of between Earth, Moon, Sun, where you essentially can put stuff in space, which is fixed in the firmament.
Okay, that's somehow fixed to what? The Earth and the moon.
Relative to Earth.
Okay, all right. Anyway, this is a rabbit hole.
Yeah. Anyway, next week there will be a lot more about satellite communications, potentially satellite compute, although I'm even less convinced of that than a lot of terrestrial edge compute argument. But direct to device, or Americans call it direct to cell, which always gets a bit confusing.
So it goes to the base station.
The idea is,
because that's what that implies, isn't it?
Yeah.
Direct.
But they talk about cell phones, don't they?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, so it's misleading.
Yeah.
It's just them using their
D2D
weird
or
ass
D2C
yank terminology.
Exactly, yeah. So depending on who you're talking to, it's either D2D or D2C. It's the same thing. It's the idea that your phone can communicate with satellites in typically low, sometimes mid-Earth orbit, either on the same frequencies you use for normal terrestrial mobile, or on special dedicated satellite frequencies, which sometimes get called MSS, Mobile Satellite Service, I think, in ITU speak.
Isn't there an FSS as well?
That's Fixed Satellite Service. Yeah. There's like lots of different uses of spectrum.
Is that like fixed wireless access, but from satellites?
Well, that's Starlink and stuff, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, right. Yeah,
more like that, or
Starlink.
general satellite communications could be broadcast. Like a broadcast studio where they got 10 satellites.
You're not moving around; it's just going to Neil McRae's roof.
So the idea is that you communicate directly with your phone from space, and there's companies like SpaceX and AST Space Mobile and Amazon who are putting large satellites with very clever array antennas with lots of surface area to beam signals to Earth to connect your phone.
But the SpaceX model so far, my understanding is that they beam it to a terrestrial base station of sorts, and then that connects to the phone. It's not direct to phone.
It's direct to the phone. They also can use their normal stuff for backhaul. So you've had satellite backhaul for years or decades. Hughes and others. If you some of the base stations in the middle of Africa or a desert or whatever will have satellite backhaul. If you had a small cell on an island or something like that, you've got satellite or nothing, right? But the current thing is that your phone can communicate directly with the satellite. That started in earnest with Apple's work with Global Star for things like messaging, the emergency messaging they've done for a few years.
And we had a guy on a pod years ago from a company called Link that was talking about that, and it was just SMS sort of bandwidth.
And now, I mean, Link I haven't heard of much from recently, but there's a bunch of other
Charles something, right?
There's a bunch of companies, particularly Starlink and AST, that are talking about certainly messaging and then a vision to more data connectivity. And there's been a couple of demos where someone stood on top of a mountain and done a Skype call or something like that. Which is fine because they're the only person on top of the mountain, and indeed for 20 miles in the radius.
It's not good for those crowded mountains.
It's not great.
So here's the thing for me with satellite, because someone was talking to me about this yesterday and was like, why is there all this fuss about satellite? And I remember because when I first got into telecom, satellite was massive. It was like Teledesic and Iridium, and that was going to be the big thing, and we were all going to be like using internet services on our laptops from satellites. And then 3G came along and 4G, and it was just like it's become like ships, and if you fall down a ravine and you need to send a text message, then and I don't get why there's all this money from people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos going. I could understand someone like Elon Musk, the megalomaniac that he is, being interested in this if he thinks potentially satellite's going to become economically competitive against terrestrial, and I can take the world over and have a global service operator. I get that, but I don't understand why he's interested in having 2% of the world's population doing a few Starlink-based services. But
there's a couple of reasons. One is there is a decent amount of revenue from
2%. I know it's a lot, actually.
It might be 2% of the people, but it might be 30% of the landmass and sea and maritime and the rest of it. So the UK is relatively small, but I know there's plenty of places in the UK where I don't get signal. You go out for a walk in a forest in Surrey, and you're like, well, I've got nothing. Never mind if you drive through Montana or Mongolia or middle of nowhere.
But you're not. Even you are not a source of revenue for that, because to the best of my knowledge, we don't have some billing system where you're in the Brecon Beacons and you're like, I want to check the footy scores.
No.
But I imagine, and maybe this is preempting what you're about to say, so I apologise. But I imagine the B2B revenue stream for companies that operate in remote areas or maritime or whatever is there.
I think there's B2B. I think there's a proportion of people who live in deep rural areas or who regularly visit them. You're a hiker going to national parks or whatever it is, and you're worried about a bear chasing up a tree or whatever it is, and it's like, send me a helicopter right now. Or here's my Instagram video of the bear.
And there it goes with my leg.
So I imagine there is a bit of a market for that. But there's also people who are things like truck drivers or essentially anyone who drives through or is on transport through a remote area. There's a bunch of IoT stuff, and the IoT directed device is a slightly separate category. If I've got a pressure sensor on an oil pipeline in the middle of Alaska, that's a slightly different thing. I think that the human directed device, I think it's initially for filling in the gaps. And there are quite a lot of gaps. The problem is that some of those gaps are in rural and remote areas and some on a boat, and some are where we are now, inside a building, which satellite is of no use for.
So if you're walking on the Appalachian Trail for a few months, as some people do, and you're under tree cover while you're doing it, can you get a satellite service?
Plus or minus. It's getting better, is the answer. And I think one of the things that changes the dynamics on this compared to the days of Teledesic and Iridium is you can use the same 3GPP stack or enhancements, and it can deal with the Doppler effect of the satellites moving. And
Doppler effect, I don't understand that. I know what it is, but
it's basically on most terrestrial networks.
Cars go,
the cell site on most mobile networks, the cell sites are fixed and the users move. Whereas this is the user moving slowly, but the satellite is going overhead. If it's lower, it's not a geo satellite which is fixed above your head. It's going.
So you got to account for the
horizon, the movement. Right. So there's some clever maths and stuff.
Because you know why that's the illustration of the Doppler effect with cars. Because it's about the sound waves being compressed as they come towards you and elongated as they go away from you.
Yeah. No.
So can I just quickly butt in? To the point about the coverage angle, which you were just talking about, I still come back to the revenue side of it. I get that there are big gaps in coverage, and obviously even in smaller countries like the UK, we've got gaps, let alone in massive countries like China or the US or Australia or whatever. But who's paying for the extra cost of filling those gaps?
That's a good question. And here it partly comes down to license conditions. So if you're an operator in Kazakhstan and your regulator has said you must give 97% geographic coverage, then possibly you save lots of money by basically you doing it via satellite rather than covering large amounts of empty steppe and desert. So there's possibly an argument that it's actually cheaper for the operators in some cases. I spoke to someone from Ericsson who was saying that they thought it was probably single-digit percentages of cell sites, which might be marginally economic. But you can do things there, which is you can share, you can do network sharing. There's a bunch of other stuff. So, does it help? Yes. Are we going to be decommissioning rural cell sites en masse? Probably not. We'll see what happens over time. There's certain ones at the margin where you could probably, if it's two men and a sheep in the middle of nowhere, and then fine. Then maybe you can just do it from satellite, especially if they live in a tent rather than a stone cottage.
But isn't the bandwidth still pretty rubbish?
Yes.
You can't watch Netflix on it.
So my point about decommissioning cell sites is not like for like, is it?
Not entirely. It's getting better. There was a Starlink presentation a couple of days ago at an ITU event, which was saying we think we can get up to 150 megabits a second peak speeds. Now that's possibly for the one person on top of the mountain. But even there, we're getting better at doing. If you say megabits per second per square kilometre or whatever the metric is getting better, especially where you have a mix of the dedicated spectrum bands and you've got maybe reuse of the terrestrial bands with partnership with the operators. And then if you can do clever things with essentially beamforming from space. The challenge, though, is the uplink. It may well be that you do what AST has and you have some massive satellite. It's good for getting signal down, but if you've got 100 people in a field or 100,000 at Glastonbury, you're not going to have all of them with phones ratcheted up to maximum power, blasting 400 kilometres into the sky because you just create massive interference. It's not going to work.
I was at a friend's house during half term and they had Starlink there, and I was getting 250 down. It was pretty fast, but uplink was like 50.
Yeah,
it's still pretty good, but not, I was impressed by the download speed.
But that was only you.
It's also a difference.
Well, there were other people using it, but yeah.
The Starlink broadband is different from the Starlink direct device.
Yes,
and they're going to use different satellites for that. I mean, the broadband stuff, which I've used it on planes a couple of times. It's been fantastic, frankly.
And it's Starlink. Oh.
I've done it on
Starlink, but to a base station rather than direct to device.
Yeah, I was recently on Air Baltic, which had that. It was free. There's no sign up, no portals. Mind you, Air Baltic also has the record for being the only airline I've ever flown on which had in their pre-flight warning for passengers said, please switch off your AR, VR headsets during takeoff and landing.
You just want to be techy.
They're more advanced over there than I thought they were.
Please power down your robot.
Yeah, that's coming next. Yeah.
BA also made it all free on their flights. Yeah. I wonder if that's any good.
Well, they will do. They're aiming to do Starlink rolled out. I mean, at the moment, BA, you get free messaging. And I think they do free for one device in first class or something like that.
No, I think they changed it now at BA. Now it's free for everyone, yeah. But that's going to make it, because you have 300 people sharing what kind of speed,
You can potentially get a gig, particularly if it's like, with a beam over the Atlantic.
There's so many devices, so many people.
If everyone's streaming Netflix simultaneously, then it's problematic. But I don't know, certainly the couple of times I've used it, I was like, this is actually quite good. Yeah, there was another satellite one I had on. I can't remember. I think it was on China Airlines, the Taiwanese one, over the summer, which was pretty decent as well. Anyway, so
I'm going to get you. By the way, keep talking, but I'm going to get you to get towards the. This is what to look out for. This is bollocks stage, and then we'll get into the final segment.
And so I think one of the things to watch out for is coming back to the previous topic is satellite sovereignty. And so in Europe there's firstly a project called Iris Squared, which is about more critical satellite services for government and military and defence, and that's sort of getting a fair amount of focus. But there's also one of the things in the European New Digital Networks Act was this idea of a pan-European authorisation. And at the moment, if you want to provide satellite services in Europe, you have to do it country by country.
Right.
EU and non-EU. And so the EU wants to do a single, frankly, it makes sense given border coordination issues, where you sign up once and then you can be a European satellite provider. I suspect we'll probably hear from Vodafone, which has a partnership with AST Mobile, is probably the most obvious candidate for exploiting that. And then there's companies like IoT. There's a couple of ones that do IoT-focused ones. I saw one called Satellite, which I think uses NB-IoT from space. So I think that there will be discussion next week about sort of sovereign satellite. There's the general mass market direct-to-device, which I think is being a bit overhyped. It's interesting, but it's and particularly in America, where there's lots of Musk fanboys, it gets massively overhyped. And then there's the satellite. The latest thing is satellite data centers, which I think is sci-fi. You're going to run some compute in orbit, and there's people who've put a handful of GPUs, and I'm sure if you're doing image processing for Earth observation, or you're doing military compute for where is that rocket coming from, where do we think it's going to, absolutely you will do satellite and space-based applications in space. But am I running my company's SAP on a satellite or streaming Netflix on my sofa from orbit? No.
I mean, knowing fuck all about it, even I can just think off the top of my head, there's a cost of getting it up there, there's powering it, and presumably which would be entirely solar, there's cooling it without convection because you don't have air in space.
Maintenance?
There's bandwidth of getting the data between that and the Earth over wireless. So anyway, I'm sure the fanboys have addressed all of these, but that's just four off the top of my head as a complete dilettante.
It is one of those things where if I'm going to have a full discussion of this, I'll start finding myself using the word 17thly.
And drinking lots of whiskey.
Okay. Okay. Let me wrap that up. Sorry, Ian, but we want to get one last little segment in the sort of few minutes that we have left. So there's a bit of a tangent. That's brilliant, by the way. I think that's possibly the most disciplined we've been on this pre-MWC thing, and as a consequence, I think we fit a lot in and hopefully given people plenty to arm themselves with going into the show. So I want to address something that happened this week. There was, and this is going back to AI, there was a company that I hadn't heard of prior to this called Citrini Research, and they published something called the 2028 Global Intelligence Crisis, and it's called 2028 because what they did was they had a sort of alternative future, a sort of near future
projection.
Yeah, projection. This is how things could be. And basically, to paraphrase it, I will read one or two bits from it, but I sort of skimmed it. It's quite long, but I sort of skimmed it, and they're basically talking. I tell you what, I won't paraphrase it. I'm going to read from their final segment some bits that seem to summarise what they were talking about. They said, for the entirety of modern economic history, human intelligence has been the scarce input. And then ... that premium, that thing that set us apart is our intelligence. Not just raw IQ, but going off and going to university and, I guess, what's the word? Applying that intelligence in very specific ways. Like you did a degree in physics, is that right?
Yeah.
Did you do postgrad as well?
No, I didn't. No.
Right. But if you'd done postgrad, then you could have just gone further down the physics rabbit hole, which obviously you at least only partially did because you're telecoms and you're not trying to do things with atoms or whatever. But this is how we differentiate ourselves in the marketplace. Largely is our IQ and our education.
Yeah.
And what they're basically saying is now that's getting commoditized. And so to go back to, and they're calling that a premium. So to go back to reading from this piece, it goes, we are now experiencing the unwind of that premium. Machine intelligence is now a competent and rapidly improving substitute for human intelligence across a growing range of tasks. And before you start giving us one of your talks on the subject, let me finish. I could just hear him tutting out the corner of my ear. The financial system, optimized over decades for a world of scarce human minds, is repricing. That repricing is painful, disorderly, and far from complete. And then it goes on to say it's not too late to do something about it. And anyway, and before I shut up, I've got to say that today I saw someone else from Citadel Securities published a blog sort of addressing it and pushing back on that sort of future counterfactual. Let me quickly say this, and then I promise you I'll pass the ball to you. It said John Maynard Keynes wrote that predicting productivity growth, that it would be so powerful by the early 21st century, the work week would fall to 15 hours. So he's saying we're so productive that we need to work fewer hours. And then they say, which I thought was interesting, this is more economics than anything else. He was directionally correct about productivity growth, but profoundly wrong about labour market implications. Rather than working dramatically less, societies consume dramatically more. In other words, we all work just as much, if not more than ever, but we just got cool as shit.
But but the way the economy works is that your employees are your consumers, yeah?
Yeah, there's that as well.
So this is this to me was the slightly nonsensical thing in the doomsday scenario where there's like mass unemployment and just
this is the sort of Citrini,
running everything. It's like, I get the concerns about it's quite thought provoking in a way. It's like what agentic AI could do to the workforce, but if you're going to look at it in this, like the whole economy falls apart because no one's employed anymore and no one can afford to buy the stuff that your companies are making, then where's the fundamental value in AI?
Yeah, so you're saying it undermines itself by getting rid of its own consumers.
If it's going to completely undermine your company's like business model.
Yeah, because
that was the stupid thing about it, I thought.
Okay, well they did address that, but go on.
It's not going to be binary and you wake up one morning and go, oh shit. Yeah,
well, there's that too.
Yeah,
but it could happen quite rapidly.
It could do.
I mean, a lot of the doom mongering is it happened more rapidly for governments and regulators and the people who are supposed to commandeer this stuff.
But none of this is new. I read a book on saying the same thing about 5 or 10 years ago. There's a guy called Callum Chase, who's a futurist, who's written a couple of books on this. And the idea that, this is like there's a lot of the UBI fantasists.
Well, the UBI would be the thing that I don't know if they talked about that.
They did.
Right, well, that would be the answer to it, though, I suspect, if you could somehow engineer
So they've got,
that.
Towards the end of their piece, they've got a couple of diagrams.
And it's fantasy, I know.
They've got a couple of diagrams they're called circular flow diagrams. One is as we are now, which is, just the benevolent cycle of, companies producing stuff, but also employing people, and those people then going off and buying stuff and that cycle.
I mean, there's a lot of people employed, to be honest, who don't need to be employed. And this is the whole David
that's going to be an issue.
This is the
bullshit jobs thing.
But the David Graeber bullshit jobs thing has been a thing before generative AI came along.
But I think this could kill a fuck of a lot more bullshit jobs than have done previously.
But it could also, talk my own book here, it could lead to more people being self-employed. Yeah, because you have, I read just as many pieces that say, the one-person billion-dollar company, because, one person can set their agents whizzing to do everything, and all of a sudden you've got the next...
And you're just this puppet master at the centre of it.
Yeah, so maybe we end up with, all your bullshit jobs merchants go and, set up their own company,
and that feeds the productivity thing, because to your point about the bullshit jobs, Ian, the hypothesis is that those bullshit jobs will disappear, but those people who were doing bullshit jobs will end up being more productive in the way that Dean was just describing.
As will some of them sit on the sofa and do nothing? Possibly, yes. But equally, I've worked for myself for 25 years. My parents were both self-employed. This isn't new, and some people...
Does imply that you have a personality trait that points you in that direction.
Or it could just mean that I got made redundant 20 odd years ago, and
fuck it.
Someone came to me and said, would you like to do some freelance work? I'm like, I'll try that for a bit.
One thing led to another.
Well,
the bullshit jobs thing, the David Graeber sort of thesis is partly that those jobs are there to sort of to serve a kind of societal purpose,
almost a semi-UBI type of thing.
So you have people. You need to keep people occupied. You need to have them doing.
Because otherwise
something.
they'll be off rioting or committing crimes.
And why would companies be doing that anyway? It's because you create your own. You have your own consumers who basically are buying your stuff. It's a systemic thing. I think his explanation of it, I think, is being criticised and it's flawed on some levels, but. I just think the whole generative AI wipes out all jobs. Well, there's no economy
more
then,
agentic, I'd say, but
so I don't quite get the argument that they're coming out with, because if there's no value,
but I do have a thought on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yes, I think there's going to be an awful lot of disruption, and there certainly will be people who are unemployed for some period of time, and absolutely there's going to be stuff which will need government policy and there'll be financial ramifications, but this isn't new. And I saw things like the markets moved. I'm like, people have been writing this stuff for years. And so, frankly, I would have expected it to have been in the price already. And just because someone's had either themselves or they got ChatGPT to write a nicely worded paper, and it happens to have done the rounds on Wall Street.
I'm not quite sure why it attracted as much interest as it did, because it's not strikingly original.
Well, no, I think you both make really good points, and I think that's interesting by itself, because it moved stock markets, especially in software and SaaS shares.
What, send them up or down?
Down.
But wasn't that more like Claude? Rather than
this honestly, I've seen plenty of accounts that just this one hypothetical by one lot of people I've never fucking heard of.
And who are these people anyway?
Are they like research?
Are they gurus who've like been involved in the thick of it before?
So this is my point. I think, and this isn't so much about AI. This is more about markets. To me, it shows what a speculative bubble we're in, because for those of us who are old enough to think back to the .com bubble. Yeah, people know that this is on a very flimsy foundation. So as soon as something comes on, even something that's not backed up by data, but it's just conjecture like this, that sounds a bit bullish or bearish, they overreact to it. And I think that's a sign of the mentality that's going on.
I mean, I'm now thinking maybe I'll get ChatGPT to say, read 100 science fiction books and see if there's any signs of each of these coming true, which stocks will move up or down.
You should do that.
And front run it.
Yeah.
And then then just publish a book review of some random sci-fi novel. Everyone goes, "Oh, that's good. Yeah, I didn't know that." And
and then you've
quid's in,
and you've already picked positions
front run it, yeah.
So that's interesting about this. And then just one other thing I want to say in this response from these people who, again, I hadn't heard of. It just came up on an aggregator, a tech aggregator that I follow, Citadel Securities. Theirs was quite.
They're famous for
go on.
The GameStop debacle. They were.
Oh, so they're good on this sort of thing.
No, they had been massively hit by it.
Had they?
They were shorting GameStop, and then
and then the meme
high street
meme investors
traders
fucked it up.
Yeah.
Oh, so they're one of the people that got stung by that.
Yeah, they didn't shut down or anything.
No, they obviously didn't because they wrote something today.
But they now have a massive chip on their shoulder.
Well, I guess they do. So I'm going to read something. It's a little bit in the weeds in terms of economics, but it's a sort of response to what I just said. It's just their conclusion, which is just one long paragraph. So just bear with me. Their conclusion is, for AI to produce sustained negative demand shock, the economy must see material acceleration in adoption, experience, and near total labour substitution. No fiscal response, negligible investment absorption, and unconstrained scaling of compute. That's a fucking long time. That's not bad for a few beers, is it? It's also worth recalling that over the past century, successive waves, this is the stuff they've bolded, successive waves of technological change have not produced runaway exponential growth, nor have they rendered labour obsolete. And this is the key bit, the second half of their paragraph. Instead, they've been just sufficient to keep long-term trend growth in advanced economies near 2%, which, not coincidentally, is kind of our inflation target as well. Today's secular forces of ageing population, so this is them talking about downward pressure on growth. So today's secular forces of ageing populations, climate change, and deglobalization, per the sovereignty thing, exert downward pressure on potential growth and productivity. Perhaps AI is just enough to offset these headwinds. And then they conclude the macroeconomy remains governed by substitution elasticities, institutional response, and the persistent elasticity of human wants. So that's
the response to the paper.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a more mainstream view.
Right.
Isn't it? That's the mainstream view.
Yeah, and it seems quite sensible. There's lots of quite technical language in there, but it seems to make sense vaguely to me.
Essentially, there's lots of friction. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have to deal with companies' procurement departments, and my other half works in procurement. Companies do not change their procurement policy and go, you know what, we're going to liaise with the HR department, fire 90% of workers and buy these AI agents. Yeah. Procurement systems are some of the least flexible things.
Least elastic, to use their word.
Least elastic, least flexible, slowest changing of everything. And so even if you've got some whizzy thing, the idea that everyone tomorrow, their procurement department's going, we don't need people doing this, we can get a few AI agents, has never engaged with the procurement department.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all very sensible. So this shit is going to take a while to play out. I still think it's useful to have these thought exercises as to how it might play out. The time periods are highly debatable. And I think Ian made a great pushback when I was talking about a Dario Amodei sort of slightly apocalyptic thing where he's going, well, it's in the interests of people who are bigging up AI to big it up in both directions, both utopian and dystopian, which I thought was a great point. And by the way, since you said that, I've seen a few other people make that point. You probably nicked it off them.
Side note.
No, I'm only joking.
NVIDIA is in opening trading is down 3%, even though they
smashed their numbers.
Record breaking,
Yeah. So obviously them smashing their numbers is priced in.
Well, they didn't smash it enough. Yeah.
I think it's probably someone's worked out that if it carries on at the current growth rate and the valuation, it implies sort of GDP of several planetary systems. But,
Indeed. But for the time being, they're still just bringing in
Who's still
sick
buying
amounts of revenue.
GPUs? Haven't you bought enough GPUs by now?
Well, you must see all these headlines the whole time about how, I think there was one this week about how Meta has signed up with AMD and they're all talking about gigawatts. A gigawatt of processing is however many zillions of GPUs. It's a massive thing, and they're throwing gigawatts around like confetti.
And they're also coming out with massively...
no one's doing very well out of any of this.
Well, it is all a bit...
NVIDIA.
No, you're right. It is all a bit notional. Certainly...
NVIDIA and a few hyperscalers.
Certainly the LLM people are running massive losses.
Do you feel much better off? Do you see all those retailers and other like bricks and mortar companies doing really well because of all this AI stuff? I don't.
No, but I don't think that's these things don't happen because of moral or societal good.
But their whole case is that AI is going to bring massive benefits to whole industries and economies.
No, I'm not seeing it, to answer your question.
Do you see it in telecoms? Do you think telecoms is in a much better place now than it was 3 years ago because of generative AI?
I don't know. Well, why don't we're about to finish off. Why don't I give the final word to Dean on that? Is telecoms better off?
I'll tell you next week.
That's quite a good point in which to end it, unless you've got any last thoughts about what we spoke about, because I know, Pierre, you got stuff to do. So that was good. That was a good experiment in me trying to be a little bit stricter on the time management. You were very strict on the time management. And we managed to fit quite a lot in. We did. So let's see how it goes. So yes, we're going to be doing our next pod. We're going to be doing from the show floor in Barcelona, and last year we had a bunch of guests, and we're hopefully going to have a bunch of guests this year because we're so damn popular. So thanks for listening to this. Enjoy the show, and make sure you join us for that one.